going to be focused on Drupal, obviously, but also kind of wide, going a little bit wider for web content management, how to really manage projects for web content management. Whether you're dealing with large scale sites or small scale sites is not really going to be a factor here. One of the things, I'll leave this link up later. They wanted us to give out the link to the presentation page, so there's going to be the opportunity to give feedback later on. I'm assuming we're going to be able to post the slides at some point, so all the slides will be available either on the presentation page or you'll put a link there to the small slide share or something. But there's a part of the presentation where I'm going to go through a number of questions and things like that that you should ask during the project. So, quick introduction to myself. My name is Matthew Dorman. I'm actually based out of New York City. I have a background in development in computer science. I have a computer science degree. I've done a lot of development with websites starting from about 95 forward. Got into a lead role early on. Started doing more project management of those projects. My project management role within my current expertise is really, I manage clients a lot. I work for a professional services company, so I manage a lot of projects there, but mostly I do a lot of architecture as well. So I'm going to be focused on kind of pushing you guys to get a little more technical. So when you're dealing with web content management, you're dealing with sometimes some people are just getting into the space, especially with open source. So they may not know everything. Sometimes you get really advanced developers as well. So the more you know about Drupal and then also the web space as well, the better you're going to be able to run your projects. So I'm going to give you some tools and things like that as well, but I'm going to kind of go over a pretty broad range of tools, and mainly tools that I've used. I'd love to get some feedback from you if you guys are using more tools and a little more collaborative. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me. I'll have hopefully some time at the end as well, but don't worry about stopping me. I run the open source practice at Northpoint. Northpoint is based out of New York. Happen to be here for family, so it was a good timing for me. We deal with a lot of media and publishing sites. Those are magazine sites that have obviously an online presence. That's shifting more into mobile now, but Drupal as a back end. So primarily all my web development experience was great. I could do a project management position as well because I knew how to do web development. Now I'm having to shift into mobile and figure out that as well. So broadening my career a little bit. These are some of the projects I've recently managed. In New York, we deal with a lot of large-scale magazine publishers. So these are some of the ones over the past few years at Northpoint that I've dealt with. These, while they're big-name brands, they're still a website. So they still have content management. They have articles, they have blogs, they have slideshows, they have editors. They have business people that are trying to create content, and they have a lot of requirements. So, whether it's a large-scale site or a small-scale site, these practices can be used across the board. Here's a quick outline. I'm going to go through some resources that I use on a daily basis. Every once in a while, I'll go back to them as well. And go through some common project management tools that I've used. One of the things you're going to find is that I don't have this session's not going to be about this is one path, and this is common to anything you're doing with Drupal. There's not one path to do everything. I'm going to give you a number of tools that I've used. Every project is a little bit different. For me, my clients are different every time, so I have to deal with either their tools or a collaboration of my tools and their tools, or the project team is really small versus a large project team. So I'll go through a few common tools that I use. Again, if you have other tools that you like to use, bring them up so that everyone can get a better idea of what's available. Go through some common techniques and methodologies. If you're new to project management, if you've been doing one type of technique, this will give you a little bit of exposure to a few other things. And then these are some questions that I like to get answered along the project. These are some technical, some business, just varying types of questions. These aren't questions for you guys necessarily, but they're questions for you to ask when you're on a project or when you're leading a project. So extra resources. The number one thing you can do is obviously get involved in the community. If you're leading Drupal projects, you probably should get involved in the Drupal community as well. Whether there's meetups. These meetups, you're going to find a lot of people. You're going to ask a lot of questions. You're going to get a lot of questions answered. It's really about learning about the platform, how it's used, where it's used, what are some of the issues some other people are going to come across that you're going to come across on your project the next time around, or possibly the problems that you're having right now. Drupal camps, another great source. This is obviously, you can check that off the list. You're here today. You're going to get a lot of information the next 2 days about Drupal, about how to run your projects, about technology, about business cases, and all sorts of things. This is where you're going to learn how to be better project managers, better project leads. And then another group, there's a group specifically for project management on Drupal.org. This is the URL. Again, this is going to be maybe available if you want to do a search, but it's just project-management. These are the 3 main areas. And there's additional meetups in New York. We have group meetups, or more drinking types things. You get the idea. The more you can meet the people, the more you can interact face-to-face, not just your project, but people that are working on other projects, other types of projects, the better you're going to do on future projects. So does anyone have any other other resources they've used specifically around Drupal, but project management as well? Are there other? I know there's at least one meetup in the Denver area, but I'm sure there's other meetups as well. Maybe other types, maybe specifically to project management. I'm not really sure. So I'll get into some of the tools that I use. Jira. Jira is originally it was an issue tracking system. More recently, in the past few years, they've added this plugin called Greenhopper. It's made by a company called Atlassian. You can either download it or have the hosted version. We use the hosted version. This allows you to do if you're aspiring to do Agile with Scrum, you can do stories. You can track issues. You can track tasks. There's a wiki. It's a lot of tools all in one, basically. We use it for pretty much all of our projects at this point, whether it's 2-person projects or 5 or 6-person projects. The tool, again, it can be either paid. It's paid if you have the hosted version, but you can also download it and install it on a shared server yourself, and that's free. It's an open source project, I believe, as well, or at least a piece of it is. Another project is called OpenAtrium. This is a fully open source project. It's based on Drupal. It's a distribution. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with distributions, but distributions are basically a group of modules and a theme specifically built around a certain package. So in this case, it's a project management tool, but it's for collaboration. It's for tracking documents and things like that. But it's also something you can download and install yourself on your servers or on a hosted system. And you can create accounts and everything, and it's all Drupal on the back end, so it gets you a little bit more exposure to Drupal as well, all at the same time. Another one is Basecamp. So Basecamp, we use Basecamp a lot for documents and collaboration. Jira primarily for tasks, but we also use, and it can do documentation and things like that under the wiki. But Basecamp is really good for sharing of information. It does a really good job for that. Whether you're posting up documentation on requirements documents or just going back and forth with things, Basecamp does a pretty good job. But again, Basecamp is a paid product. So OpenAtrium kind of goes in between what Jira does and Basecamp does. OpenAtrium does a really good job at the communication part as well. And if you have budget concerns, OpenAtrium is obviously the free choice. Basecamp, if you don't want to have to maintain something, you can use Basecamp, but it's a per user license. And then another one is Pivotal Tracker. Again, Pivotal Tracker does the issues. It does some of the documentation, storage, and communication as well. It was free at one time. I think there's more of a paid model now for the hosted version. And there's a ton of other tools, but in the past few years, these are the ones that we've used primarily. Not to say that the other tools are bad, it's just that either we've given exposure by our clients to use things like Basecamp or Pivotal Tracker, or they just fit a very specific need, like Jira does for us. It's a hosted model. We don't have to maintain it ourselves. We have about 300 people now using it between our clients and our internal developers and project managers. And it's a pretty large, Atlassian is a pretty large company. They do a lot of support. They do a lot of enhancements so that as we make the Does anyone else have other tools that they use?
There's a real good freemium one called Team Lab. I've used all those before. And like Jira is mostly free, but to get like the training to get started, it's 5 figures. I mean, it's very expensive.
Yeah, and also Jira is a heavyweight system. You wouldn't want to use this for 1 or 2 projects. If you're going to adopt it and use it for all your projects, because training is expensive, just adoption, just like kind of like Drupal. You can do a lot with it, but it's a big tool.
And Open Atrium is, I mean, it's free, but it's kind of hard to use. It's not great for project management. Basecamp's great. It's Web 2.0 Ajax-y, but it's expensive. Team Lab kind of takes all that and has a mostly free module. Teamlab.com.
Our company uses Salesforce with some custom programming in it. I've also used Harvest and Workamajig to do different project management. Harvest is good for time tracking. It's got a free install. It's all web-based. Salesforce is web-based.
So Salesforce, you can like create time tracking or maybe project schedules?
Yeah, we track our projects, tasks, sales, clients. All of our database information is stored in there. It ties into our form handler so we can make updates in Salesforce and it changes it on the website. So we've done a lot of, I guess, bridging between Salesforce and Drupal and our systems.
Yeah, so one of the other tools that I don't have up here is obviously Microsoft Project. It's a tool that I do use personally, but as a team, I don't really use it because it's very difficult to share the project plans. Most of these other tools have some way of showing the schedule, things like that, and more about collaboration. Over the past 3 years, it's really moved to collaboration more than just the schedule.
We also use Redmine. Anybody else uses Redmine?
I've heard of it. I haven't used it yet.
Yeah, it's open source. It's also bot tracker, ties into SVN, uploads documents. It actually creates Gantt charts for you. You bring start and end times for your tasks. So pretty neat. Redmine.
We use Track. And we've got a Drupal implementation that will allow us to indicate when tickets are created in Track. It'll send a bot message to our IRC channel, and we're able to log everything that's said in a variety of different IRC channels that we're making use of.
And the nice thing about Track also is and also Jira is it integrates with Subversion or other code repositories, so that when developers make commits, they can say, all right, I fixed this issue, and everyone, like through IRC, people can know about it, or just reading the logs, it ties in as well.
You're looking for an open source integrated with CRM solution. Sugar has some interesting stuff. We're just starting to look at that actually for our client.
Yeah, so I mean, just like Drupal, there's tons of different options. It's more about if you have people that have internal knowledge about these systems, I would start with those and begin to evaluate these or some of the other ones as well that we've talked about. Because these all do have learning curves, and the more knowledge you have internally, or someone you know, the better, the quicker you're going to adopt. Otherwise, you're going to use it the wrong way, or you're going to spend a lot of time using it.
I've also used Untitled and .project in the past, and I've used Jira as well, and out of all of the myriad of packages that I've made use of, I'd say that Jira with Greenhopper is the strongest.
Yeah, I know a number of our clients do use Untitled as well. It's great for creating issues, creating tasks, and it can actually make deployments and things like that. Like all these tools are beginning to do like an all-in-one. They can do basically all your development, and all your issue tracking, all your communication in one. If you use the whole tool, it's really, really powerful.
Untitled includes repositories, a Git repository or SVN, which is kind of nice. Even the free version of it includes repository space, which is kind of nice.
So I don't know how technical some of you are. Code repository is basically where developers manage their code. It's backed up. It's version control, so versions of their code. So every time, every day with like Git, they can do it locally or externally. So it's a way for collaboration among developers. Even when there's only one developer on the project, they really should be using some sort of version control, whether it's Subversion, Git, even CVS, I guess. But Subversion and Git are really that's your primary. And looking forward, it's primarily going to be Git as the version control system. As a project manager, you don't necessarily need to know how how to install it, you need to know that that's one of your tasks, to get that installed, to get that up and running so that people are using it, even if it's only one developer on the project. But anyone else have other systems?
We use Rally software.
Yep.
It's really good for Agile. And
Rally
Scrum.
software is actually an amazing product. It's very expensive though.
Yep.
And I haven't used it on my projects. We used it to test out when we were comparing it to Jira. Our problem with Rally software is we wanted to do all of our clients have access, so that cost was just going to be extremely high. If we were going to only do it internal, that would have been a great solution for us.
We also use Untitled to do our repository storage. We use Open Atrium for our documentation, and then we use Jira for our multi-site. We have 200 sites running on
For deployments of the code for the sites. Does anyone have any questions about any of these products? I've used them, but not really sure how to use them. Sure. Here. Just going to go over some techniques. I'm not going to go too deep into these methodologies, but I want to kind of get them out. These are the ones that we've used. And you're going to recognize the terms, so I will describe what they are. But I'm not going to go, I'm not going to say one's better than the other. I'm just going to kind of show them all. Agile Scrum is something that we've used quite a bit over the past 2 years. We've shifted from a pure waterfall approach. We're a professional services company, so we're not part of any individual company. We don't support products long term. So we do a little bit different Agile Scrum than the traditional or the way that you're really supposed to be doing it. Agile Scrum, the entire team is meeting on a daily basis for a Scrum. It's an iterative process. You're doing what's called a sprint. So a cycle could be 3 or even 2 weeks to 4 weeks long, building out a fully finished product, ready to go live. Now it doesn't necessarily need to be something that's ready to go to market necessarily, but the idea is that what we do in 4 weeks or 3 weeks is actually a full product, fully tested and ready to go. Why we don't use that full approach is because most of our clients still require a waterfall approach. So full documentation up front, you go through a build cycle, you go through a QA cycle, and then you deploy it after, could be 3 months, could be 4 months, some of our projects. Some of them are nice and short. What we like to do is take that waterfall approach, give them, and that's why I use Microsoft Project or some other form to come up with an entire plan, and then I divide it up to manage my team, to the development team, more of an iterative cycle so that we can continue to give them some exposure to the product before 3 months has gone by and they don't even know who's been working on it. Some of the other terms, test-driven development. This is getting more involved, primarily like in .NET and Java development. They've been doing it for years. In PHP, not a whole lot. But the idea around this is that you build all your test cases, or you develop all your test cases for all your functional requirements, and then you build against that. So you're building for your tests. So in a lot of PHP development, you get all these requirements and you build a bunch of stuff, and then you test it, and then you figure out how to test it. You're not done with your development until it's passing these tests. So it's you basically passed all the requirements as soon as you pass your tests. So it's a little bit different mindset. Get all your tests up front. It's more about getting your requirements and getting knowledge before you start development, which is really good for more junior developers to get into that early on. But it's really, it really puts in place where you have to get that done before you even start development. So you write all your tests out, maybe you work with a QA team, or just the PM to get those all done. And then the other thing is pair programming. We don't do this a lot because our clients kind of see this as, why am I paying 2 people to do one person's job? But this is a really good way to get a lot of work done. If you're supporting a product, if you're with a company that has a product, if you're doing off-site development, you're going to get a lot more work done and a lot more professional and finished work done by having 2 people work side by side. The idea is that you have one computer, really one keyboard also, and 2 people sitting next to each other. They could be, it depends on how you want to work it, but it could be more junior person and a more senior person. It could be 2 very senior people going through architecture and migrations. But the idea is that one person's always watching the other person, and you're getting basically finalized code at the end of the day that normally might be not fully tested, not fully vetted, and you're getting an extra set of eyes. And as you work through this and as you get better at it, your progress or the output is going to be much more than just having single developers off doing their own thing. Some of the other benefits is obviously, one of them's not going to be doing Facebook if the other one's taking control of the screen and one person's doing development. But I mean, that's kind of a very side case. If someone's doing Facebook all day long, they're not producing anything. I'm sure there's plenty of other techniques. Has anyone come across any other methodologies that they use currently?
We're using Kanban.
What's that?
So it's basically swim lanes on a board.
Oh, yes.
And you just pull stories in and you have width limits for how many stories, or you can have in test or in progress.
So
and
it's
review.
Similar to Agile?
Yeah, it's a little more, even more lenient than Agile.
Okay. How many people, like on a development team, would that take? Is it for small teams, for bigger teams?
Yeah, it can be from small to big. I think our biggest team is maybe, I think we've got 10 developers.
Sorry, what's that called?
Kanban,
C-O-N?
K-A-N-B-A-N.
Yeah. Anyone else?
So in theory, it's not a piece of software.
Okay. And all of these, all of these approaches have, I went over some of the tools that we use. Obviously, they're more towards the Agile Scrum, but test-driven development has very specific tools that you would use as well. Pair programming also has very specific tools that you'd be using for that type of work. Not only just the type of development, but just tracking it and things like that. So I'll get into some of the questions. And these are going to be driven to kind of pushing you guys to getting more technical. These are all going to be, not all technical questions, there's some business ones, but these are all questions that I come across that I need to get answered by the end of the project or at different phases. There's lots of questions that have to be answered, but I think that these are the ones that keep coming up, and if I don't get them answered at the right times, the project kind of goes in the wrong direction pretty quickly. So before a project begins, you need to know the launch date. This is the whole idea of a project. It has a beginning and an end. But in addition to the launch date, is what's driving that date? Is it just a date that they've put out there? Is it because there's a certain amount of budget and we know that we're going to hit that budget anyways by that date? Is there advertising that's going to start on that date? Is there a magazine that's going to be published? There's all kinds of reasons, and those reasons kind of dictate how you're going to manage the project towards the end. Because if it's a really hard launch date, then you're going to start removing scope. Or adding budget to add resources. If it's not that hard, then maybe you can push it out a little bit, or maybe even launch early. But that's pretty difficult to do. What are the business goals? You need to know these as well, because you need to know, why are we doing this project? Some requirements are going to come in. You're going to be questioned. You can actually manage some of the scope yourself as a project manager if you know what the business goals and drivers are. You don't have to go back to the business, your business leads to ask them, is this really important or not? If you know all the goals, you can manage that a little bit better. How many resources do I have? How much money? This is going to help you obviously manage the timeline and scope. Because if you have 2 people to do what looks like to be 4 people or 4 persons amount of work, the earlier you know that, the better. Sometimes you have a certain amount of budget. Like in my projects, I have a certain amount of money, and I dictate how many people I can have on. I can roll them on and off. But if you're at an organization where you have 5 developers working, that's all you can use. You can't get the 6th one without hiring someone or hiring an outside firm. So that's a fixed amount you can use. Who edits and maintains the site now? Do they have it? Have they ever used a CMS before? This is primarily if you're going to do them. If you're adopting a new CMS, if you're migrating onto Drupal, maybe from WordPress, maybe from something old like Vignette or Interwoven or something like that. We do a lot of migrations off of Vignette and Interwoven. So they have a specific idea of how to manage content in that tool. Some of those things have to be matched in Drupal. Some things can be completely changed. If they're using WordPress, they're used to a nice, clean tool because they're doing a very specific task. Now they're going to use Drupal where it can get a little bit unwieldy because they're able to do so many other things. So maybe you have to set up roles and things like that. And then, is there an easier solution? So once you know some of these things, maybe actually WordPress is the right solution. Angie talked about it during her presentation. WordPress is a good solution for blogging, for very basic, sites that have a blogging. You can also use Drupal gardens if you want to stay with Drupal, but if they have a very simple site, they don't necessarily need to host themselves. Is there just an easier solution you can build within Drupal as well? There's distributions that you can use now. You give it to them, they install it, and it's a full managing news and open atrium for project management. There's a lot of distributions now available. And then some of these other questions are, when will design be final? And obviously that date is never, I don't think I've ever hit that date. They've always come back with, can we go a little bit longer with design, so when's it really going to be final? Because final designs, a lot of these clients or companies even, they're not able to build off the wireframes because they don't really know what they're gonna want until they see the final visual. So that final design date is really important. You can build so much, but until it's actually solidified, that's a date that you have to hit. I usually go through a lot of back and forth here, but I don't know how we're going to do on time. I have a few other areas. So I'll go to the next one, then we can ask more questions. These are just after the project begins. So you've already you've already started the project. The first one is kind of closer to Agile and Scrum. You need to know what the blockers are, generally on a daily basis. If someone's quiet and they're just heads down into their code, you need to ask them on a daily basis, maybe during the day. Send some notes if they're supposed to deliver something yesterday. Find out why that's a problem. It's not because they're doing something else, probably because they're coming across something. And within Drupal, ask them, have they submitted an issue to Drupal.org? Have they asked some other people? Have they gone to IRC? More junior developers are going to try to do it themselves. Most likely the problem or the solution is already out there. So they need to be opened up so they can use the greater community. This is another one. Larger projects have migrations of content and URLs. You need to get that list of site URLs as soon as possible. That gives you an idea of how big the current site is. Some of the missing pages that you have no idea. No one spec'd this page out, but it's got, it's a store, right? Now you have e-commerce, and you didn't even know about that. Until you get a full list of URLs, if they can define it, whether it's a client or your business lead, that kind of puts a stake in the ground that this is what you're gonna be building on the project. And this is something to ask to your lead developers or your developers. Do we really need this many modules for this piece of functionality? Sometimes yes. Sometimes it does take a lot of little pieces to build a piece of functionality. However, sometimes you're only using little tiny pieces of 5 modules. And you can do it in about 5 lines of code if they did a custom module. Custom modules get support and things like that, but the more modules you have, the more you have to maintain. When there's security updates, you have to be constantly checking for them. When there's just regular updates, you have to check and you have to do QA. So you try to limit the number of modules you're going to use with Drupal, or any CMS really. And then another one, especially now that we're moving into Drupal 7, almost all the modules I'm using right now when I'm doing a big Drupal 7 site are in either dev, alpha, or beta, it seems like. Ask them, it's in that state. How do you feel about that? The bigger modules, it's not that big of a deal. The reason it's in that state is because they're still working through some small issues. They don't feel like it's fully baked. But some of the other modules never get out of dev or alpha. And there's a reason for that. The maintainer threw something up there. There's a great solution, but it's probably not something you want to use just as is. You probably want to take it in, either take over the module or take the module in and support it yourself, because there's going to be a lot of things you're going to have to do. Are there any other questions you guys might have? And the idea is that continue to ask questions along the project. Ask them of your developers, ask them of the business unit, ask them of yourself. Just making sure getting a list of these types of questions and other questions answered is really going to be key to launching a project on time, on budget, within scope. And then launch planning. This is another phase-over project, especially web development. There's a specific date. You've got a current site up there. You're going to be putting up a new site, most likely. Sometimes it's a brand new site, brand new domain, but often it's an existing site that you're upgrading, you're doing a new design. You need to know what the rollback plan is. So a rollback plan, on a specific date and a specific time, you're going to put up this brand new site. If tons of things go wrong, you need to be able to go back to the old version. And that's not always just a quick switch. sometimes there's been migrations. If you're a really active site, you're getting new comments put in right away. So you need to have a full plan of going back to the old system. Always prepare for it, because it's not that it's going to go back and it's going to stay there, but it might have to go back for a day. Or the idea is, if we get this far along, the rollback is really, there's no rollback. Have the plan, but you're not going to really do it, because ideally you're going to push forward. Make sure you're doing these at a certain time when it's low traffic, or at least so you can have enough time to fix things before the traffic starts to pick up. Or let's say you're building a college site and enrollment's going to start on a certain date. Well, make sure you do it at least a week before that, maybe even further into the summer, so that you're not doing it with days before students are going to actively start using the site, so you get that nice window. Because you're going to launch with some bugs. You're going to find new bugs. My thought is that most business users are not going to look at the site until, like the higher up people are not going to look at the site until it's live, or very close to live. And that's when you're going to get the major blocker issues that are going to come in. And those are the ones you're going to have to address right away. Hopefully you can push forward and fix those as they go. But sometimes you do have to roll back if they haven't looked at the site for the data that's live. Start to get a cutover plan. The cutover is when you're going from one site to another. A brand new site, there is no cutover plan. It's we're putting the domain up. Maybe you went from beta to live, but there's no real cutover. You didn't have users before, so it's all brand new. Make sure you have a list of people who are responsible, and you should have all their contact information, not just their email address. Have their name, have their cell phone, have their Twitter account. I mean, everything you can possibly think of. Make sure you have of the key people, because most of these are going to happen in the middle of the night or very early in the morning. And someone might oversleep. They might get stuck in traffic. Who knows what's going to happen? So get as many forms of contact as you can for the key people. Because you don't want to get to step 3 and not be able to go to step 4 because your system admin is not available, and then you have to do rollback because one person wasn't there. It's always a great idea to have other people that can do tasks as well, but generally it's usually one person responsible for a single thing. Another thing that's caught me early on, not because I didn't ask about it, because someone forgot about it, let's say, is how long is the time to live on a domain? If your domain is pointing to this server, and then you've been doing development on this other server, the time to live is usually on a normal site is going to be a day or a week or longer even. So that's the time that all the traffic's going to be going to that caching system. So if you switch over the domain to this other one, this IP address, and you haven't lowered that time to live for a month or weeks at a time, people might be going to that other server. Sometimes you don't have to worry about that, but that's something that ask. Do we have to worry about? Because what you want to do is, if it's a month out, you need to lower it a month before. If it's 2 weeks, you need to lower it 2 weeks, because you can't do it right at the launch time, because it's another 2 weeks after that gets lowered. So you want to lower it to 30 minutes generally, and then that way you can switch and do the rollback back and forth. And again, I think I already said this. Make sure you get all the contact information, and then I usually open these up at what you guys have been looking at the last one. If you're all on site, make sure that as a PM you're bringing the beer or bringing everyone out. So it's been a long, stressful project. People have been burning midnight hour or midnight oil in the last few weeks possibly. It's time to relieve and get some beer. Any other questions for this? That's right. So quick summary. So the extra resources. This is the idea that we're going to get involved with the community as project managers. We're not developers. We're not all going to be committing code, but we should be getting involved in the community. Hopefully, you're going to meetups. You don't have to attend every monthly meetup, but you're attending a few. You're talking to some of your developers that you're working with. You're getting an idea of what their problems are with Drupal, with maybe WordPress or some of the other systems, and you're getting more involved in that. You're going on to Drupal.org groups for the project management. There's questions that get answered there. There's problems. There's a pretty good community. It's a pretty small community right now, but I think it's starting to grow because as Drupal projects get larger, before a lead developer could manage the entire project, but now they're getting much larger, so project management is getting more important within these projects. So that group is probably going to grow quite a bit. We went over some project tools. I think a lot of good ones were brought up as well. Some techniques and methodologies, there's going to be tons, there's going to be new ones that are going to come out. I think the shift is going into more agile or agile-like iterative approach. Most of these projects or products that people are trying to launch are something that no one's ever done before, so they want to get it to market as quick as possible. But they don't necessarily need to be fully vetted. It needs to be a good solution that they can iterate through and actually change as they go. So they're going to launch a site and go from there. Yeah.
When it comes to the techniques and methodologies, are there any maybe a good book or something to read to really get up to speed on how they work in more depth that anyone could recommend? Or
I don't know.
maybe
I'm not
several
a big book
books?
person. I go to training seminars. I go to things like that.
Because
I'm sure there are
I
lots
know
of
the
good
general
books.
idea behind them, but I'd like to
Right.
learn more about each one to understand it better.
Does anyone, for either waterfall or agile or any of the other?
For Scrum, there's one
Software
called
management by
User
Green.
Stories Apply.
It's pretty good. It covers waterfall, and it kind of gives a breakdown of different strategies you can use. I mean, it's an excellent book.
A lot of these methodologies you can read some blog posts and get a general idea, and then once you start to learn a little bit more, then you find some books. Most of them are pretty deep. There's a lot of most of these methodologies also, they're not straight. You have to do it this way. There's always little branches of you can do it this way and that way. I've yet to go pick a single methodology and go straight with it, especially in our types of projects.
What was the title that you suggested?
Applied Software Project Management by Green.
Applied Software Project Management. Okay, thank you.
There was another one called Agile and Iterative Development that kind of discusses the differences between waterfall and agile.
That do you compare it to?
It's Agile and Iterative Development, the manager's guide.
Does anyone have questions?
Iterative.
I don't understand your Texas accent.
Yeah, that's probably it.
So you guys all managing projects currently, managing it in the future? I know most of you are either leads or project managers.
I mean, how much sort of prep work do you have to do in sort of instilling your methodology and your culture into the client? Because some clients obviously are fly by the seat of their pants or do all that sort of thing. How much do you typically spend with the client to sort of instill like this is the way we work?
I try to be as transparent as possible about the way we do things, but I don't push them. So myself as a project manager, that's one of the things that I have to do is manage our team the way we want to manage our team, but also be able to report into a unit or a business unit or a company the way that they want to be. They want to have reports. So that's where I really have to be flexible. And sometimes I do have to shift the way we do things a little bit, just because it's if they want a full project plan, they want to hit these dates. Agile, it's a little bit more loose. The idea is you're going to do things in 4 weeks, but you're not going to get them done. You're going to push them into the next release. Sometimes, even if it's not done, they want that pushed into the release as well, so that they can actually see it. Or they want, then we have to work extra hours because they thought we were going to actually hit this with all this amount of work. The idea is that you kind of push things into the next one, and that's where, as a professional services company, that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to go true agile because we're dealing with a budget that we're not in control of. We have to hit these dates, so we actually have to get that amount of work done. So we have to adjust scope sometimes as early as possible.
Hi, I work with a firm called Civic Actions, and we do Scrum, and our education of the client starts in the sales process. It's from the very beginning. This is how we work. This is the benefits of it. And it's really about our process is why we think that we should be chosen for the client. That's a good match with them.
Hey, man, usually you guys also do waterfall?
Well, I do as a PM. We don't traditionally do waterfall. If it's a 4-week project, it can kind of be a waterfall because we need to get all the requirements done anyways. But primarily we're dealing with an agile. We're creating user stories, we're creating tasks off those stories in the development team. It's more of a hybrid because we do work with very large organizations that That's all they do. They have a PMO office. They'll even sometimes create the project plan for me and requirements, and we'll work on that requirements document. And I'll generally create user stories based off of that. What generally happens though is they work more in our, we'll create that plan, we'll work off that schedule, but they'll see how we're working and they'll see the iterative development, and they'll change their business requirements as we go along. So that's always going to happen. Once they see a certain product or a certain outcome, they're going to say, well, they want to change it a little bit. So once they start to use that, the idea that they have to come up with all these requirements and then you're going to launch with that goes out the window. They prefer to go through this approach.
That was my follow-up question was, if you do, how do you, what kind of deliverables do you create up front for those that consist of having that waterfall approach so that you can translate those to Drupal development team?
It's generally, if I have to create the requirements document, I'll create a requirements document, fully vetted. It'll go through a whole approval process back and forth. That usually takes weeks to do that. And in the meantime, my lead developer or myself, we're creating all the user stories based off that document. And it's it's as bad as that might sound, it's actually kind of a good approach because you have two sets of documentation. They both have to match each other with user stories and actual written documentation. You have two sets of users. One person's looking at the documentation, another developer's using user stories, and then I'm looking at both, making sure they both match up. It takes a lot more time, takes a lot more effort, more money, but sometimes it has to be done because certain companies deal that way.
One note, Acquia is coming out with training on Drupal project management this summer sometime. They create the schedules, not the schedules, what do we call it, the curriculum, and then companies like mine and others provide training on that, so you can start looking for that. Real detailed project management training from Acquia.
I'm hoping it pushes more technical as well.
I know Acquia does Agile and Scrum.
You
so
don't have to be a
Agile.
developer as a project manager, obviously, but I think you need to know what modules are. You need to know what themes are. What a themer is. A themer is not just this front-end developer that's doing HTML, CSS, and Drupal. A themer is actually a developer as well. They're creating PHP. There's quite a bit involved, and it's actually a pretty advanced role. A front-end developer is also a very advanced role. They're doing jQuery and interaction at that level. So you need to know what technology you're building a Drupal site as well, what hosting requirements there are. You don't have to, but you don't have to know it. You don't have to have it all in your head. You need to know where to get that available. Who asks?
So this is a bit off topic, but we're supposed to be doing evaluations for all the sessions and
Yes.
such. Did they tell you where you're supposed to evaluate it?
So if you go here, this is the original session page. I believe they're going to post it. It might already be posted how to evaluate.
Evaluations aren't working,
They're not?
apparently. Yeah, in IRC, there's a conversation going on
Okay.
between Greggles and Coltrane right now.
So either save this URL. This just goes to the Drupal camp, the Colorado camp page that happens to be this session. So that's the short link to it. If you already had it available, it's going to be the same page. I believe the feedback is going to be there. At least that's what I was told. And I'll try to go on there and either add a link to this presentation, or I don't know if there's another place on the campsite that they'll have links to presentations. But this will all be available to download. How did I do on time? We still have more time if you have any more questions. Random Drupal questions. I am a developer. I know Drupal very well. Done migrations, architecture. If you have any random questions that you're coming across, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your organization and such.
Sure. So we happen to be a New York-based organization. I live in New Jersey, work in New York. I happen to be out here for family, so when I proposed a session, I got selected. We do a lot of media and publishing sites in New York, a lot of magazine sites. That's why most of my background is in magazine sites.
How many people?
We have 100 people in the organization. That's split up between .NET, Java, and PHP. My team is the open source practice, which is mainly PHP and Ruby. There's 22 of us.
What's the perception of open source in the organization versus other alternatives?
Even .NET and Java do a lot of open source right now. The .NET team is primarily Ectron and Sitecore. Those are products that you download or you buy and install. Our organization is much more towards open source. We get much better products out the door quicker. It's not taking away business; it's just creating new business for us. we're migrating all these companies off of Get, Interwoven, some Nectron as well, onto Drupal or onto WordPress. So it's creating as much business as it's taking away work, because we're able to do more things that we prefer to do. So the base content management system is in place, modules are in place, and then we build the customizations that our clients want, and then obviously hopefully contribute some of those back as well.
So is what I hear from you that in your organization things are moving from proprietary to more open source?
We're moving other organizations, but yes, I started at North Point 4 years ago, and we had no open source development. So in 4 years, we've gone through from 100% doing proprietary systems to, at this point, we do over close to 40% of our work is open source, Drupal and WordPress and custom